In this video, you will learn about the major spinal nerves connected to the cervical plexus, brachial plexus, lumbar plexus, and sacral plexus. The most superior of the interlacing spinal nerve networks is the cervical plexus connected to C1 through C5. The brachial plexus overlaps with the cervical plexus at C5. Nerve roots from C5, C6, C7, C8, and T1 all connect to the brachial plexus. The lumbar plexus connects to spinal nerves L1 through L4. The sacral plexus is the most inferior spinal nerve plexus. It overlaps with the lumbar plexus at L4. The sacral plexus is connected to spinal nerves L4, L5, S1, S2, S3, and S4.
Here we can see an illustration showing the cervical plexus, which arises from C1 through C5 and carries information to and from the neck and shoulders and the posterior regions of the face. This major nerve that extends out from the cervical plexus from C3 through C5 is the phrenic nerve. And the phrenic nerve excites contraction of the diaphragm. Here we can see the phrenic nerve extending down on the right and the left to innervate the diaphragm. Here we see an illustration of the brachial plexus, the interlacing network of nerves that connect to the upper limbs. The brachial plexus arises from spinal nerve trunks C5 through T1. C5 through T1 are also known as the roots of the brachial plexus, and the roots continue on to form the trunks of the brachial plexus. C5 and C6 come together, forming the superior trunk. Then there's a middle trunk, which is the continuation of C7, and C8 and T1 come together, forming an inferior trunk of the brachial plexus. Now, each of those trunks give rise to divisions. There are both anterior and posterior divisions, so 6 divisions total. The anterior divisions are shown in yellow, and the posterior divisions are shown in the shaded black and yellow. All of the posterior divisions come together, forming a cord called the posterior cord of the brachial plexus. The anterior divisions of the superior and middle trunks form the lateral cord, and the anterior division of the inferior trunk forms the medial cord. And then branches come off of the cords of the brachial plexus, and these include the major nerves that travel through the brachial and antebrachial regions. The ulnar nerve arises from spinal nerve trunks C8 through T1. The ulnar nerve branches off of the medial cord and continues along the medial side of the arm and forearm. The median nerve arises from spinal nerve trunks C6 through T1 that connects to both the lateral cord and the medial cord. And the median nerve travels down the anterior of the arm and forearm along the midline, just lateral to the ulnar nerve. The musculocutaneous nerve arises from C5 through C7 and forms as a branch of the lateral cord that travels down the anterior of the arm. The radial nerve forms as a branch of the posterior cord and forms from C5 through T1. So all of the 5 roots of the brachial plexus extend out, connecting to the radial nerve. And the radial nerve travels down the posterior of the arm. The axillary nerve is a smaller branch coming off of the posterior cord. It arises from C5 and C6. And as the name suggests, it travels into the axillary region, into the shoulder. Here we can see major nerves of the brachial plexus as they're traveling down through the arm and forearm. We have the ulnar nerve along the medial side, exciting the flexor carpi ulnaris and flexor digitorum profundus. The median nerve, just lateral to the ulnar nerve, travels along the midline of the arm and forearm and excites most of the muscles on the anterior of the forearm, including flexor carpi radialis and flexor digitorum superficialis. The musculocutaneous nerve, we can see, travels down the brachial region in between biceps brachii and the brachialis and excites both of those muscles that flex the elbow joint. Here we can see the radial nerve as it's emerging on the lateral side of the forearm. The radial nerve will excite the extensor muscles on the posterior of the forearm. It also excites the extensors of the elbow joint, like triceps brachii, and the extensors of the wrist, like extensor carpi radialis, and extensors of the digits, extensor digitorum, are all muscles excited by the radial nerve. Here we can see a posterior view of the arm showing the major nerves of the brachial plexus that are traveling through the posterior. We have the axillary nerve that branches off of the posterior cord. It travels in to excite the deltoids and teres minor. And then here we see the radial nerve, the larger branch that extends from the posterior cord, travels down the posterior brachial region to excite the triceps brachii, and then continues down into the antebrachial region where it excites the extensor carpi radialis and extensor digitorum. The lumbar plexus arises from spinal nerve trunks T12 through L4. The major nerves that arise from the lumbar plexus are the femoral nerve and the obturator nerve, arising from L2 through L4. Here we can see the femoral nerve as it's traveling down the anterior femoral region to excite the quadriceps femoris. Here we can see the obturator nerve as it's traveling down the medial femoral region in order to excite adductor longus and adductor magnus. Here's an illustration of the sacral plexus that arises from L4 through S4. The sciatic nerve is the largest nerve in the body, extending from spinal nerve roots L4 through S3. So the ventral rami of L4 and S3 come together to form the sciatic nerve, and then major divisions of that sciatic nerve, we can see the tibial nerve, and it says here common peroneal. That's a synonym for the common fibular nerve. Here we see the major nerves of the sacral plexus as they're traveling down the posterior of the thigh and leg. The sciatic nerve is the large nerve traveling through the posterior of the thigh. And then the sciatic nerve branches to form a common fibular or common peroneal nerve and the tibial nerve. The tibial nerve travels down through the popliteal space into the sural region to excite the plantar flexors like the gastrocnemius and soleus, and the flexor digitorum longus, flexor hallucis longus. Then the common fibular nerve is going to curve around to the anterior of the leg and then branch to form a superficial and deep branch. Here we can see the common fibular nerve as it's wrapping around the lateral side from the popliteal space and branching to form a superficial fibular nerve that runs down the lateral side in order to excite fibularis longus and fibularis brevis. Then we can see the deep fibular nerve that's traveling down along the tibia and excites the tibialis anterior muscle that performs dorsiflexion.